Okay, so welcome to Catalyst Conversations, where we explore the powerful intersections of art, science, and the human experience. I'm Alberta Chu, and today our inaugural reading circle begins. I'm here with Anna von Mertens, the author of Attention is Discovery, The Life and Legacy of Henrietta Leavitt, published by the MIT Press. This summer, our community will be diving into a masterpiece of interdisciplinary storytelling. Anna is a renowned visual artist, and her work is in the collections of Boston's Museum of Fine Arts and the Smithsonian. She maps astronomical data onto hand-stitched textiles and bridges historical data with human emotion. Meet Anna von Mertens.
Oh, thanks, Alberta. Thanks for having me as part of Catalyst Conversations.
Yeah, here's a copy of the book that we're
All right, we can have one book.
together
Say
as a
hi to the
group.
other copy.
So can you tell us about your work and your path that led you to Henrietta Leavitt, and maybe show us some examples of your art?
Yeah, sure. I am a visual artist and I develop very research intensive exhibitions. And so I was invited to Harvard Radcliffe Institute in 2018 to develop one of these research-based exhibitions. And I had sort of open access to any of the archives on campus. And one of the places I visited was the Harvard Plate Stacks, which is the oldest and largest collection of astronomical glass plate photographs in the world. And it was there studying these glass plate photographs of the night sky from the 19th and the late 19th, early 20th century that I first heard Henrietta Leavitt's name. I learned that she made a discovery that would launch modern cosmology, and her story just struck me as so incredibly profound, both her life and her work and the impact of her discovery, that I dedicated my exhibition to that subject. And the project has really unfolded from there. The very first thing I did as a visual artist was make a quilt diptych in response to this profound story. And that quilt is captured in the book here. These two panels, they're stitched panels and they show on the left-hand column, they show the stars above the place of Henrietta Leavitt's birth on the day of her birth, and the right panel shows the stars as they would be seen above the place of her death on the day of her death. So in this way, I began this work just through making art objects that would help tell her story and resonating so deeply with her work. So that's where I began.
Can you tell us a little bit about just how a glass plate is made?
Yes, yes. I know these are strange, unique objects. So, a pane of glass was coated with a light sensitive emulsion, and it was placed in a telescope and exposed to starlight through the telescope's lens. And now these were photographic negatives. So that meant that when starlight hit that surface, a chemical reaction would occur. They would develop it just like a photograph, and it would become a photograph negative, so that the stars themselves would just become black specks on this pane of glass. And if you think of a really coarsely ground pepper just sort of strewn across a glass surface, that is sort of that's what the stars registered as, and that's what Leavitt studied.
Wow. So then in the book, when you showed the page, it was hard to see because it's so dark. So
Yes.
get the book so you can actually see, the image. So you started out by making artworks that expressed Levitt's story, and then what got you to like writing a book?
Yeah, so right. So I made hand stitched quilts in honor of her work, and I also made drawings that are also in the book based on these glass plate photographs that she studied. So it was through making that I tried to sort of explore her intensity of attention and the way sort of following her methodologies through this work. But then engaging with her story, it was so layered and so fascinating that I really wanted to spell out the full narrative and really celebrate the profound impact of her work. So I really wanted to dive into the scientific relevance of her discovery, both founding modern cosmology as the basis of modern cosmology, but also remains relevant in contemporary cosmology today. also fascinating is the unique circumstances around her life and work, is that she was part of what's a group of women now known as the Harvard Computers who worked at the observatory. And it was very unique for women to be offered a paid position in the sciences at this time. And these women were hired to analyze the glass plates. There was so much data held on those glass surfaces that that data needed to be organized as a way to be at all manageable to try to make a discovery. But in their organizing of the data, they became the most intimately knowledgeable of that data. And they went ahead and made those astronomical discoveries in their own right. So the fact that Leavitt she worked in the brick building, the so-called brick building on the Harvard campus, and only women worked in that building. So the fact that there was a group of female scientists dedicated at sort of the cutting edge of the field of astronomy at this time, at the turn of the 20th century, is such an interesting story. I really wanted to dive into all the layers of that narrative.
It is such a great story. So then you've spoken, speaking about like gender based, and these are all women, you've spoken about the word patience as like, you know, it's gendered and it's all very, but it's very active. So how would you reframe that with
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. Is that I noticed that that if Levitt was given credit, it was sort of almost like a pat on the back, like, oh, she did this hard, patient work that assisted these other great discoveries, like Edwin Hubble's work about galaxies beyond our own and our expanding universe is entirely based on her discovery. Her discovery is the tool that Edwin Hubble applied to make these discoveries. And so I sort of thought we really need to examine her methodologies, examine her work, and see what was held there. And yes, it was patient work, but it was also persevering work. If you look at Edwin Hubble's work, he certainly required patience to catalog these spiral nebulae and to study the observations by eye. That requires an incredible amount of patience. So I was like, why is patience only assigned to women and not the male astronomers? And it's interesting. I relate to that personally as a quilter. And make it as an artist making very labor intensive work. It's often said, "Oh, you must have incredible patience," and it's sort of like, well, any job that you set out to do that is hard requires patience. And so the scientific discovery requires patience across the board. And so and diving into Levitt's methodologies, I really wanted to highlight how groundbreaking her discovery were, how unique her skill at attention and perception and really collating information in her brain is so phenomenal that I really wanted to celebrate that aspect of her work as well.
yeah. Um I can't wait to dive into this book. So then you spent nearly a decade collaborating with the Harvard Plate Stacks. When you handled these artifacts that Levitt had actually worked with, did you have any kind of emotional connection or spiritual kind of reaction?
Yeah, that's interesting to consider because these are right. They're data in some ways, but they're also these glass plates are such precious, unique objects. I mean, if we really go through the whole narrative of their creation, for one thing, these plates that Levitt studied were physically taken in Peru. She was studying stars in the southern hemisphere, so just the fact that in the 1890s a photograph could be taken in Peru and shipped 5,000 miles by train, by on barge, on a steamer, all the way to Cambridge, that is a remarkable story. The fact that Levitt could glean information from the complexity of these plates is amazing. And then the fact that they were preserved 100 years through time, these fragile and very heavy glass plates are very heavy objects, especially when you have 500,000 of them or over 500,000 of them, which is what Harvard has. They have over 500,000. I'm saying that if I have, I've lost like count of how many they have. They have 550,000 plates in their collection, which is just astonishing. And so, yes, encountering these objects, it is just the remarkable their existence alone. But when there was a particular plate when I first heard Henrietta Leavitt's name, and it was of the Small Magellanic Cloud. And in looking at this, these specks of pepper flakes on the glass surface, I heard Henrietta Leavitt's name. I heard that she studied this group of stars and made this important discovery. And I thought her eyes rested on the same pane of glass as mine. And it is, I mean, I get goosebumps even just saying that. There is a deep connection when an object can bridge through time, this important figure's work and life and her dedication to that work.
Hmm. How big are the plates?
They are just, well, that's actually one of the reasons I made this book, 8 by 10 inches, if you can sort of have perspective. But many of the plates, most of the plates she studied were 8 by 10 inches. So just really a small pane of glass that could contain hundreds, thousands of stars on a single plate. And just to dive into the complexity of that work, there were different exposure times. So some exposure times might be up to 3, 4 hours, and that would allow the star, the starlight of stars that we didn't even know existed at the time. It would gather their light and bring them into view, available for study. But some, might just have a 60-minute exposure. And so she had to translate, these different exposures, these different taken from different telescopes that would produce different results. So she had to really figure out first how starlight was translated onto the glass, understand that language, and only then could she build her own understanding of the stars in the heavens.
Wow. Um, it's just so neat to think about, I don't know, like time and all this, the journey, just all of it. It's just a really neat project. Um, so you want to talk about grids?
Yes.
Like a grid is like just, X, Y, just very like rigid. And it just the idea of like using a grid to capture all this crazy data and your quilting and that kind of thing, like, is that, I don't know, what do you think of that?
Yeah, well, what was interesting, in I came into relationship with the grid myself when I tried to try to replicate some of the glass plates Levitt studied. And for one thing, so I sort of wanted to do that, to reproduce a one-for-one sort of translation. If she studied these stars so intently that my own gestures and mark making in graphite to create these stars would have a sort of similar experience, of trying to understand the stars. And Leavitt herself would impose a grid on some of the glass plates. She studied some of these larger glass plates, 11 by 14 inches, in particular, that would have thousands of stars. She would take a so-called Rousseau plate that had a grid on it, and she would superimpose that and make a second photograph with a grid superimposed. And that would just sort of at least organize these stars into boxes, right? And so when I was making my drawing, I did the same. I penciled out a very light graphite grid and began to find my way. But I found even within that, it was such a constant active orientation. So even within my little box, it was like, okay, here are the two brightest stars, and this next star is sort of, I would sort of find these guideposts and then try to build the stars and orient myself around that. But any sort of glance up to, Levitt made notations in a logbook next to her. Any glance up from the plate, you return back to it, and that process of orientation needs to start again. So Levitt, it just is interesting that one, yes, a grid needed to be superimposed just to have any hope of navigating amongst this sea of stars. But even then, it was such a disorienting world. And just getting into her methodologies a little bit further, Levitt studied variable stars, and these are stars that changed ever so subtly in their brightness over time. And so she was trying to track their light curves, trying to track the path of them going from bright to dim and back to bright again to see how long that pulsation period took. So she was trying to track the same star across plates over time and see if its little speck changed ever so slightly over time. So again, just fathoming finding the same star across plates, much less trying to catalog its changing brightness. It awes me to this day that she was able to do this work.
Yeah, in like 1910 10 or something?
Yes, she really began in earnest working at the observatory in the early 1900s, and then her announcement of her famous discovery is in 1912. So, and then she continued. She died in 1921. So, those first 20 years of the 20th century was when she did this work. And if we it's hard to imagine that that's only just over a century ago, that when at that time in Leavitt's time before her discovery, you looked up in the night sky and there was just a sea of stars, truly a sea of stars, and there was no depth to them. There was no way to tell which stars were closer to us, and or if a bright star, if a star shone less bright in the sky, well, did that mean it was the same brightness as a bright star but farther away? There was no way to tell. And so why Leavitt's discovery was so profound is that she, it's complex how she actually arrived at it, but she gave astronomers a tool to measure large scale astronomical distance for the very first time. So this meant that they could begin to sort of place these objects in space and develop a three-dimensional understanding of the cosmos. Truly a revolutionary act.
Yeah, and this is like before light pollution, right? Before
Yes,
electricity. Wow. I mean,
yeah,
around the
yeah, right. If you think of that, I mean, some of the telescopes she looked at, of course, the ones in Peru had truly no light pollution, but they even had functioning telescopes in Cambridge up on Observatory Hill, which is, of course, part of Cambridge now. But back in that day, that was you head up to the hill to do some observing.
yeah. Wow. Um, so let me run through. Okay. A couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
In today's modern world, driven by algorithms, instant gratification, short attention spans, your book argues that attention is discovery. Do you have advice to our community on how you can cultivate slow attention in their everyday lives?
Yeah, it's right. I mean, certainly a practice like we all need somewhat desperately practice at, right? That we are in this attention economy where our attention is being stolen. So I suppose the advice is, I mean, that's something in my daily life I try to do where it's very simple advice, just do one thing and you begin it and end it and you stay focused on that one thing. I mean, so step one is just not scattering our attention, but really having that focus. And then once you start training that, it's almost like a meditation practice, right? You start training your attention, and then you find the richness of what's in front of you, and that's really what Levitt did. Is that she was just measuring the brightness of stars. That was her first initial task, and from that, she created this profound discovery, which is recognition that in the subtlest of details, there is richness, there is something to discover. And so when we all start to train our attention, it reminds me of a meditator who described, getting to this level where the sound of his refrigerator, he just started to find fascinating because it was so like complex and nuanced. And I mean, not that we all hope to have, that's not the most exciting destination for our attention. Um, but I experienced some of that myself, that I'm trying to replicate these stars, and they do. And that's when you think, oh, you made a drawing of a glass plate, like how is that not almost as boring as hearing the refrigerator hum? But once you got in there, you realized how unique each star was. That the photographic emulsion produced these strange effects. So you had these little artifacts and spikes and translucencies, and every star truly was unique. So in that way, I got to experience that there is richness in front of us if we just pay attention.
Huh. Cool. So because of our technical difficulties,
Yes.
get any audience questions because that was going to be happening on the Catalyst Conversations Instagram, but we'll figure a workaround. Okay, so at Catalyst Conversations, we bring artists and scientists together in dialogue and collaboration. So our mission is to break down the silos between art and science. Can you express your thoughts on what artists and scientists share and what you have found at the intersections of these disciplines?
Yeah, there's such affinities between the disciplines. And I find in particular, I mean, my passion is cosmology. And if you look in particular at that science, it's really about the intelligence of the eye, right? It's that we're looking at the layers of perception and trying to understand truly what we see. And there's so many misdirects and sort of tricks of the eye and sort of tricks of our preconceptions that we need to really peel away to be present and to see what's in front of us. And the other similarity too is that there is this process of creation, whether it's steering towards a scientific discovery or steering towards a finished artwork, but you don't truly know the destination, right? If you know a discovery, if you know where you're headed, that's not a discovery. Same with an artwork. There is a receptivity to being like, I am going to steer my attention towards what I find fascinating, see what germinates, see what's cultivated, and the direction you head in can truly surprise you. So that parallel process of creation, of study, is so parallel that it was really, I find when I hang out with scientists that we really have a shared language and a shared methodology that we approach our work with. Now it looks like, there is a question here from someone saying, I haven't read the book yet, but I'd love to hear more about how you incorporate her discoveries methodologies into your art practice. What kind of craft do you do? So I'll answer that. It's and Amy Cutler's on as well. That's nice.
Oh, I can't
Uh,
see
Oh,
this.
you can't. Well, I can see it on my end for some reason. Who knows? We are. I am brand new at this, all of this. But in terms of I do come from a quilt making background, that is my craft practice, and so a lot of my work is, I talked about that diptych honoring her life. So quilts are a wonderful way to tell a story, to preserve a story through time. But my stitch patterns also take the form of ways galaxies organize these cosmic structures, not truly the cosmic web, but that network of gravity that is forming these structures. And so many of my stitch patterns highlight this three-dimensional universe that Levitt's discovery helped us understand. So that's one form that it takes. And then there's also, as I mentioned, these studies of the glass plates and trying to sort of bring.
Oh, I can't hear you. Oh no.
Um,
So
but now it's good. But
you
and then this drawing practice as well.
oh you
So
there. Can you repeat that? I don't know. For me, you dropped
oh,
out.
okay. Okay. Yes. So yes, I have this quilt practice and then also this drawing practice of which is really much more akin to a quilt practice as well, is using my labor, using the gesture of the hand to sort of create a presence, thinking about time. So this drawing and quilt practice are in conversation with each other.
Are there more questions from the audience?
I just see a hello from Amy. So that was just the one question I saw pop up.
Okay. I want to ask if there's anything that you found in your research that did not make it into the book. Like, what is the thing? Like the last thing you had to cut?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, let's see. Well, I mean, that's interesting about Levitt that there was very little primary sources available. So any gem that I found, I treated like the precious thing that it was. So I'm trying to think of not necessarily that something didn't make it into the book. Although, one thing that is in the book, but I chose not to emphasize is the fact that Levitt has been described as being deaf. And so I did want to dive into the specifics of that because that term really had different meanings and it was applied differently back then. And so so what I discovered is that Levitt, by the end of her life, was deaf, and it was a progressive loss of hearing, that she slowly lost her hearing in her 20s and lost her hearing by the end of her life. But I chose not to feature that in the book. I mean, it's certainly present in the book, but what I found interesting is that it was not a fact that was emphasized in her lifetime. And in fact, her colleague wrote her obituary and it was not even mentioned, which is truly extraordinary. And to me really speaks to the community of this community of women who accepted each other as they were. This was not a disability that was accommodated in the workplace at that time at all. And the fact that it was just folded in and accepted, and Levitt was just celebrated for her work, I find truly an interesting fact about that time period.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh,
I wonder if that contributed to her, visual acuity.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, another extraordinary fact is that her colleague, Annie Jump Cannon, another famous astronomer in this group of women, was also described as deaf. Although in her instance, I found that she did have a hearing aid so that she would utilize. When when she was out in social occasions. So again, it's just, yeah, it is an interesting reality that was just yeah, folded into the brick building at Harvard. Now, I did have a follow-up question. So is there any evidence that these glass plates were viewed as artworks in addition to being data back in the day when Henrietta was alive? Oh, that's a great question. Because though they were truly seen as data, um, like they were treated as data. I mean, again, they were appreciated as miraculous objects, but they were seen as data. One thing that's been really challenging and that I've been working with the Harvard Plate Stacks about is that there is a transition from them being pure data to this sort of transition to being an archive that has more, numerous layers beyond scientific data. So in the book, I discuss this, I through the writing of the book, I got to witness this transition. Is that Levitt and her colleagues would make ink notations on the glass surface as part of their, determinations. And when these glass plates were being scanned digitally to make the data held on them more accessible, those ink notations were deemed essentially to have almost zero value, and they were quickly photographed with a low res JPEG before those ink notations were wiped clean, because it was the idea that you needed clean data to be digitized. So there was this transition, and I was part of that outcry to say this layer of those notations, one, are scientific data. They are part of the scientific history and part of the discovery and part of their methodologies. So they have scientific value, but they also, of course, have deep cultural value. And so I'm really happy to announce, and it was partly this book going to press where it was like, okay, she's going to press, we need this final decision, that now the decision has been made to preserve all ink notations held on that plate, that they have, that equal value to the other side of the emulsion. So that transition from pure data to this kind of art object or archive has happened in just the last few years.
Well,
No, I'm just reading and then there's another question about, can you talk about the juxtaposition of using a gendered art form and the gendered field of science? Yes, you're right, exactly. That I myself am used to, yeah, working in a very gendered, using the practice of quilt making as a very gendered form of art. And then Levitt and her colleagues, it was this sort of, this organization of data that they were hired for was seen as very gendered work. And in fact, it was called women's work. It was labeled, this is women's work. It's very detail oriented, attention oriented, and labeled as such. I break that apart in the book because I'm like, how is Edwin Hubble's work not incredibly detail oriented and incredibly precise? It's very parallel work. I mean, he's reading those, he has astronomical glass plates and he's trying to decipher their marks on that surface just as Levitt is. So that parallel practice, you can really, one, just expose that gender bias in there. But it also is this sort of interesting tension because if it hadn't been considered women's work, the women wouldn't have been given access to the data. So it was both a limitation in that they were paid at a lower rate than men, of course, at that time. I mean, that was standard for that day, somewhat standard now, but that was a reality. So it was a limitation, but it was also an enormous possibility. And one of the evidence of this is that Levitt and her colleagues, for women, these are mostly white, middle, and upper class women. They chose not to leave to marry. Almost without exception, these women did not marry and did not have children. And really outlying choice for that time. So these women were obviously dedicated to the work. They were passionate about the work, and many of the women stayed and worked there their entire lifetimes. And so it's also an evidence that is such a possibility. So yes, I mean, part of that is getting into gendered work, such as quilt making, such as this data analysis, and then from there, sort of transforming it into its possibility. Oh, and I see Akila's on. That's nice. Oh, all right. I'm going to keep reading questions if that's okay, or do you want us to
Yeah,
wrap up here?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, go. It's up to you.
okay, that's okay. I think. Oh, wait, no, I think I did cover them. Okay, no, I did cover them. So let's. Yeah. Do you want to do a final question?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I well for readers who are hesitant to like jump into a whole book, do you had mentioned that each chapter is its own kind of story. Would you suggest like a starting point for someone who just wants to kind of dip their toe in the water?
Yes, yes, yes. So I know I myself, right? It's hard to commit to a book, and each one of these, it's not an essay per se, but each chapter is discrete and looks at a facet of Levitt's life. And so start with the first chapter, and if that's, I sort of wrote that chapter was if this is as far as people get in the book, that it's a complete piece, and it really spells out. I really put her and Hubble head to head and see how they come out, in terms of their legacy and importance of work. So I won't spoil who wins at the end. No, obviously it's not a competition, but it's truly a collaboration. That's what science is. But I really wanted to put her up there, show her methodologies, show the context within which she worked, and celebrate the true, groundbreaking fact of her life and work. So yeah, start there, but then you can, I mean, and you can choose to go chronologically through the book, but you also are allowed to just sort of pick up a shorter chapter, a little writing excerpt, and say, oh, I want to dive into this piece today and see what it's about. And so they do act independently, and that which does free you up to engage with the book as you like. And then, of course, I will say rich visuals. Like, so there's historic photos of the women, of Levitt. There's replications to scale of her glass plates, details of my artwork. So throughout, there's rich visual imagery to guide you through the book.
Great. And we'll on the Catalyst Conversations Instagram, we'll share some of your work, and people will see how it supports this book. And I just want to just mention, like, if you want to join the reading circle, go to the Catalyst Conversations Instagram page, click on the link in the bio. It's a free registration on Eventbrite. It'll take you to the link, and then you can buy a book also as part of it, as an add-on. And maybe throughout the summer, we'll get you'll get a reading guide that Anna's written, and maybe over the summer you'll get little treats in your email, little interesting things, and then in the fall we'll have another Zoom discussion to close it out. Okay, so
Okay.
thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you, Anna, and see you all soon. Okay, see you in the
Okay.
okay.
Thanks so much, Alberta.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Take care. Bye.